This presentation provides information about subtalar and mid-tarsal joint functional assessment by Steph Pankala.
So the first thing is what you want to know is how much supination and pronation is happening at the subtalar joint, so what sort of range. And that's not a phenomenal range, actually. It's not a huge range at all. So remember, you need to have the foot in slight dorsiflexion, so you're locking into the ankle, just doing subtalar joint, test inversion and eversion. So the next bit that you want to test is from the neutral position, so you can do your way of finding the neutral, or sensing where that neutral is by feel. And if it's in neutral, what you want to do is be able to test the mid-tarsal joint, and it's not locking super well at all. If I pronate the subtalar joint, we'll get more range. Yeah, and this is where Michael tends to work. He unlocks his subtalar joint, and now he's got a really mobile mid-tarsal joint. If I supinate up the subtalar joint, you can see it locks really well. Everybody happy with that so far?
Remember, you need to assess how well the subtalar and mid-tarsal joint lock around neutral position.
And if it's in neutral, what you want to do is be able to test the mid-tarsal joint, and it's not locking super well at all. If I pronate the subtalar joint, we'll get more range. Yeah, and this is where Michael tends to work. He unlocks his subtalar joint, and now he's got a really mobile mid-tarsal joint. If I supinate up the subtalar joint, you can see it locks really well. Everybody happy with that so far?
Some terminology to consider around mid-tarsal joint movement and function.
And that's a really good point, because it's all about terminology, and I will get there. So basically, when the subtalar joint unlocks, so neutral's really important. Are they staying around neutral? If they're not around neutral, they're pronating, you're going to get increased range of motion. Here comes ground reaction force. It's going to dorsiflex the foot. Yeah? And it's unstable, so it's going to push up in whatever direction it's going to do. What you have to remember is we have a midline of the foot. And I'm just going to say that's the second and third metatarsal. Second, really, but I'm just going to say second and third, just to make my life easy. So when you dorsiflex, we have a lateral column, fourth and fifth metatarsal. And so the fourth and fifth are going onto the cuboid. We know that bit. Then on the medial column, we have essentially the first ray. Everybody happy with that? So if you dorsiflex up this part of the foot and see how my hand goes, it dorsiflexes, and really this is eversion. So you're right, the cuboid everts. But the nomenclature that they talk about is dorsiflexion and abduction, but essentially it's eversion. Okay, but it's the nomenclature they use. So we just need to remember that for ourselves. It's frustrating, I know. And then here, if you look at my hand, when I'm doing this is supination, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So my longitudinal axis, as it dorsiflexes, it's now my navicular is dorsiflexing and inverting. So, and really, it's really mostly inverting. Okay, so it's supinating. So does that make sense? So that longitudinal bisection, so when I dorsiflex on the lateral side, that's eversion, so they call it dorsiflexion and abduction. And then on the medial side, as I dorsiflex, I actually really am inverting. So, and you know those flat feet that you can sort of see that they're doing this and they get wider here and they have no metatarsal arch anymore? Can you sort of see that has no metatarsal arch? Whereas if we plantarflex, so if I supinate up my oblique axis and I pronate my longitudinal axis, so it's opposite to what you think or what you want to think. When I do that, can you see now I get my metatarsal arch back again?
So, reminder, if the subtalar joint is maintained in a pronated position, ground reaction forces will assist dorsiflexion and abduction of the oblique axis, the mid-tarsal joint, so pronation, and supination of the longitudinal axis of the mid-tarsal joint, i.e. inversion.
Longitudinal bisection, so when I dorsiflex on the lateral side, that's eversion, so they call it dorsiflexion and abduction. And then on the medial side, as I dorsiflex, I actually really am inverting. So, and you know,
some anatomy of the rays that affect movement.
So the other part of this that you need to think about is you need to think about ray motion. So again, medial column, it is not constrained by neighbours on this medial side, is it? No. My lateral column, fourth and fifth going onto my cuboid, is not constrained by any neighbours over here. But second and third are very constrained on either side. If you look at the bones, they lock in more here as well, so they can't move. So if I look at my range of motion in my first, and this is not a phenomenal range at all, but this moves more freely than my second and third. Doesn't want to move a lot. Here's my fourth and fifth. You can do them separately or together, but you can see there's a lot more movement. So does it make sense? There's nothing constraining them here. They can move very freely. The first, this is restricted range, but it can move fairly freely, but your second and third don't move all that much. So for Michael, pronates a subtalar joint, oblique axis now, the mid-tarsal joint unlocks, ground reaction forces come up, oblique axis, dorsiflexion, abduction, happy if you call it pronation, dorsiflexion forces, really inversion of the longitudinal axis. You're using also the last of your range of your rays, maybe. Your second and third can't get out of the way. You have this, normally this hollowing that sits here, and that's often when you get quite a lot of loading on people's second and third. Happy? If our subtalar joint is unlocked, mid-tarsal joint is more mobile, my oblique axis, dorsiflexed, abducted, cuboid now, not in its stable position, peroneus longus coming around the cuboid to the base. It doesn't have a very stable platform to work. Whereas if we supinate this up, the cuboid sits at a lower angle, and then if you think the peroneus longus comes around, uses this space, can you see now it's more like a V? So I'm going to have a much better pull of my peroneus longus on a V to pull down the base of the first to plantarflex the first ray. Does that make sense? Whereas if we're really pronated, now here's my pulley coming down, and can you see it's sort of trying to do it at a right angle? If you know anything about pulleys, you really want to have more pulley than a right angle. It can work, but not as effectively. So that means then your peroneus longus, which we know is really important to plantarflex the first ray for toe off, now really is just a really good pronator of the foot. So does that explain it, do you think? Everybody happy with that? Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.